Welcome to Hobson UMC on YouTube. I am VH Sonny Dixon Jr, the lead pastor here at Hobson, and I am delighted that you have joined us this day to hear a conversation that I have with Trey as we prepare for Sunday, August the 16th, which is the 11th Sunday after Pentecost. As always, we are honored that you would spend some time and share it with us as we talk about things that are relevant to us, and we're just elated when you send us messages and say that somehow there was something in the message that either gave you a sense of comfort or something that challenged you. So we are delighted to have you with us this day. As a way of centering us, I want to read for you Psalms 133. And while I do not often use the King James Version, this was the translation that I used when I learned this psalm. And so I want you to hear it this day. Behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious ointment upon the head that ran down upon the beard, even Aaron's beard that went down to the skirts of his garment, as the dew of Hermon, and as the dew that descended upon the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord commanded the blessing, even life forevermore. An important part in a time of sharing always when we are here at Hobson is to share with one another those things that give us a sense of celebration and those things that give us some concern as we gather and as we have been asking you for the last few weeks to be in prayer for the Nelson family. We particularly ask that you continue to keep them in prayer, that God's grace might provide them the comfort as they celebrated the life of his father, John's father, this past Friday. Prayers are still needed by the family. We ask that you continue to pray for them. Also, just ask you to continue to pray for those who have lost loved ones in recent weeks in this place. It is the grief process is always a difficult one, but in this day and time where grief is such an order almost of the day within our communities, and so many people are dealing with it, that it is so easy for us just to move on to the next person and forget the other. So we ask that you continue to pray for all of those who are part of our community. We ask for prayers this week as school has been in Metro, as they have been doing virtual study, and in some of the surrounding counties as students have come back to school, some still opting to stay at home. But we just ask in this very different time where a learning in different ways is both challenging for the students and for their parents, and let us also remember that it is a challenge for all of our teachers and administrators as they find ways to convey something to our students in the midst of all that is going on. I read a post on Facebook that says that this year will be like the first year of teaching for all teachers this year, for all of them are faced with something different. So we ask that you continue to be in prayer for them. Ask for special prayers for Luana Coleman Johnson, who had surgery. She is recovering from that surgery, but while she was having surgery, her mother fell and messed up a couple of discs in her back. So I ask that you pray for her and for the healing. It is Luana has had struggle with her healing because she's had the responsibility of sitting with her mother as her mother is in the hospital. So be in prayer for them. Prayers for all of those who are a part of this community who have gone off to school and starting new ventures, and we pray that each of them will be safe and practice safe methods as they're away to school. And this past week, Cassandra took her, with her son, took her grandson down to Miami, Florida. So we know the anxiety that all of the parents who are having their children or grandchildren that are off, and for the uncertainty that comes with that. And a way of closing, I ask that you just continue to be in prayer for all of those who are working from home and are isolated. We ask that you check on one another, continue to lift one another. It's a struggle for some of them, and even those whom are not working at home, those who are looking for jobs. We ask that you lift those up. There are those who continue to lose their jobs in the midst of this. There are businesses that are closed. So a lot of people are standing in the need of our prayer. We celebrate, though, however, some of the people who are here who have been able to take a little vacation and be with family and friends and during this time, and we pray for their safety and for their safe travel during this season. So remember those prayers. Also remind you that if you have a special prayer request or you just stand in the need of prayer, be sure that you get in touch with us. That just because we are practicing distancing from one another does not mean that we need to practice distance from the one who is the one that answers all our prayers. And it's always good to have one another praying for one another. Amen. The morning gospel reading for August the 16th, 2020, comes from Matthew's Gospel, the 15th chapter, and we'll be reading for you verses 21 through 28. I do encourage you, if you to go back and start at verse 10 and to read what happens before this, and it will help be able to put some of this in context for you. But the message on Sunday will focus from these verses, and let us hear them. From there, and Jesus went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from those territories came out and shouted, "Show mercy on me, son of David. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession." But he didn't respond to her at all. His disciples came and urged him, "Send her away. She keeps shouting after us." Jesus replied, "I've been sent only to the lost sheep, the people of Israel." But she knelt before him and said, "Lord, help me." Jesus replied, "It is not good to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs." She said, "Yes, Lord, but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall off of their master's table." Jesus answered, "Woman, you have great faith. It will be just as you wish." And right then, her daughter was healed. And this is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Trey, I am sure, as much as you've been hanging around the church with your pops, that you have heard this story preached before. It is, for me, one of my favorite stories, because it is a story that, for me, shows that both Jesus is fully divine and at the same time is fully human. And if we forget that, then this story doesn't have the same kind of meaning for us if we just look at this Jesus who we look at as being always right, doing everything perfect, never making a mistake, always, on his game. But this story really shows to us the human side of Jesus in this moment. As I said to the listeners, I encourage them to go back and to read the previous verses, 10 verses before this. But I'll just say to you that in those verses, Jesus is in the midst of people of whom he is trying to convince them that they need to follow and things that they need to do, and people are just utterly rejecting him. These are the people of Israel, and they are just totally frustrated with him. He's frustrated with them, and so he just decides, look, we have got to get away. I just got to get away. And I think that there is a time that all of us find ourselves in the midst of our frustration when things just aren't going well for us, that we become not only physically exhausted, but we become emotionally and spiritually, and we just need to find a place of where the demands of the day and the frustrations of the day we can just kind of leave behind. So for Jesus and the disciples, they go to a place where they believe that nobody will know who they are. And it'll take a time. They can kind of cool out and relax and kind of gather their thoughts. As we have preached in the last few weeks, a lot of things have been going on. Some fantastic miracles have been taking place, but at the same time, Jesus is just worn out and had not had his own time for grieving the loss of his first cousin and dear friend, John the Baptist. So they go to this strange place. And as they are walking around, just kind of chilling, probably trying to find a place that they can go to that's open, that's not under quarantine, that will at least allow up to 25 to gather, because at this point there are 13 of them, so they couldn't go to a place where there's 10. So they're probably looking for a place that they can have lunch and just kind of cool out. And a Canaanite woman comes. Now, she's from that area. This is the area that is familiar to her, but it is not an area. And so Jesus is a stranger, a complete other person to her. But she comes to him, and when she comes, she says, and she calls, she says, "Show me mercy, Son of David." And she goes on to say that she's coming to him because her daughter is suffering terribly from demon possessions. I think we all have found ourselves in those places too, just like this woman, of where when things are, we have done all we can, we've tried all that we could, and we are down to our last opportunity. And somewhere she has overheard the conversations. She was a Gentile, so she knew nothing about Jesus. She knew nothing about his religion and nothing of the things that he had been proclaiming. But somewhere she had heard. And I think all of us have found ourselves at some point where we were just so desperate, we were willing to turn to, as a last resort, to somebody that we normally would not engage. And for her, this is a complete other. I mean, she breaks not only religious norms, she breaks cultural norms because she's a Gentile. She has no business speaking to a person who is Jewish. She is a woman. She has no business speaking to a man in public. She is unclean because she's been dealing with her daughter who is demon possessed, and so she has no right to be able to go and to confront a religious leader. She breaks all the norms, but she is desperate. And when we find ourselves in desperate situations, we're willing to do. And when she goes to Jesus, she catches Jesus, and at first, Jesus does not say anything to her. It says, but he did not respond to her. You have got to feel in that moment that the real deep frustration that most of us would have felt, because we believe in a Jesus that is always there, always responding, always ready to hear us, always, there have been others, and we've read in the stories before, that as soon as, they speak to Jesus, Jesus responds to them. She gives him, she's respectful, she calls him Son of David. She says, have mercy on me, but Jesus is silent. And in the midst of the silence, I think he is trying to figure out, okay, how do I say, because, they've been putting pressure on him. Jesus, you have got to get away. You have been snapping at folk. You have been taking it out on us. You have got to get away. And Jesus is saying, well, maybe if I just ignore her, then she'll go away, and then we can continue on our journey. But she doesn't stop, and because the disciples then say to Jesus, you got to send this woman away. You didn't respond to her, and now she is bothering us, and she keeps shouting after us. This is a person who is so desperate that now she's encountering all of the people who are around Jesus. And so Jesus is kind of trying to figure out in his mind, but yet at the same time, he's looking at her. I see him looking at her, looking at the disciples, and he's trying to figure out, how do I get out of that? And it was maybe Peter probably kind of looked and said, Jesus getting ready to get weak. But he wants to affirm for the disciples, because it says he replied. Now, a lot of people think he replied to the woman. I don't. I think he replied to the disciples and said to them, look, I know why I'm supposed to be here, and I know that I came for the lost sheep, the people of Israel, and that's where my focus is going to be. But then, Trey, she messes Jesus up. She messes him up. Jesus is ready to walk on off, go on, say, look, I'm going to keep focused. I'm going to do what I came to do. I'm tired. I'm worn out. I'm frustrated. I don't want to deal with this. But it says that she came and knelt before him and said, Lord, help me. Boy, that messed my boy up. Because, you had to imagine what's going through his mind is that, go back and read those preceding chapters. He's been almost begging the folk he came to have that kind of respect for him, to have that kind of belief in him, and instead they running away. All they want for him is for him to do some miracles and then go on about their business. But this woman gets on her knees in front of him, and Jesus begins to waver a little bit, but he's still looking at the disciples, and so he replies to the disciples to kind of assure them, I'm not going to deal with her, and in fact, I'm going to say something that's just going to this is going to turn off. And then he said, it is not good to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Now, in the modern terms, we probably, really don't appreciate that statement at all. We certainly don't appreciate, Jesus calling her a dog, but we don't understand that whole notion, because we got a lot of people in the congregation of whom pets get better treatment than anybody. So, but in that culture, the people who would have been sitting at the table would have been men. The men would have eaten, and then after the men finished eating, then the women, if it was anything left over, then the women would get to eat, and then after the women had eaten all that they needed, then the slaves would have gotten something to eat, those who would have had to do the work. And then after the slaves ate, then the children would have gotten to eat. So it was very likely that by the time the children got fed, it would have only been a very little food left. But also in the midst of all of this different eating and going on, in particular with the men, they would have been sitting around the table, and the pets, the dogs that were there, would have been around the table because there would not have been any vacuum cleaners, no duster thing that you go and kind of clean up after. The dogs would have gotten the crumbs that have fell from the table, and then that's how they would have eaten. And the woman says to Jesus, look, even the dogs, and it really, if you look at the translation of it in its pure form, it's not, not thinking about big Great Danes or something like that. It's really puppies. She says, but even the puppies, the insignificant puppies, would have gotten something that fell from the table. You just give me the leftovers to the leftovers to the leftovers to the leftovers, because I know your grace is such that just the leftovers will be enough for me. That changed Jesus. His moment, all of the things that he had been fighting for, the things that he was realizing, that his mission and his ministry had become at that very moment something bigger, because he realized in that moment that yes, his grace, that while he came for a particular purpose, he ultimately came to provide the grace and the salvation to the world. And so he looks at the woman, this woman who had changed his life, who had come to him in the midst of where he was asking himself, is this all worth it? This stranger, this other, this person of whom he had and should not have had anything to deal with. He looks at her and says, woman, you have great faith, and it will be just as you wish. And it says, and right then, her daughter was healed. Not only do I believe her daughter was healed, but I believe it opened up the door and the pathway for all of us who are not Jewish, who are Gentiles. It opened the door for all of us who are on the low end of society, all of us who are the others, all of us of whom somehow the world tells us that we are unworthy to come to Jesus. All of us are given the opportunity for healing that day. It was the witness of others that led her to Jesus. It was the faith of others. And now it was her faith that it made a difference. Oh, I tell you what, if that ain't a shouting sermon, then I don't know what a shouting sermon is. Well, Trey, we have I've been talking about this woman, and it is evident that this woman knew nothing about Jesus. That she had probably heard as people traveled around. This takes place around the sea, and people are traveling and going backwards and forth. That there must have been some people in her life of whom came and were telling the stories of Jesus. That when she found herself in this situation, she just had to try it. And I'm just kind of wondering, have there been times in your life where it was the witness or the testimony of others that you saw them in certain situations, or they talked about certain situations, or how they dealt with it, or what had happened to them, that when you found yourself in similar situations of which they had talked about, that you said because of their testimony or their witness, you were willing to try it, even though you wasn't sure maybe that you could because of who you were or whatever. Right. I just want to hear part of
well, two things stick out. The first one is getting my feet done, getting a pedicure, man. Before I got my first pedicure, it was like, I don't know about that. I can get these toenail clippers and work it on out, and boom, 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 and I'm out the door. I don't have to go and have somebody and pay somebody $25 to, cut my toenails. But after strong suggestion and, listening to different people that have gone that are not female, that are not women, I decided to give it a try. And it is one of the simple pleasures of my life, going and having who I call Mama Kim. I don't care who she is, she gonna be Mama Kim. Rub on my feet and cut them toenails and scrape that crust off that heel and sit in that chair. Yeah, it's worth every penny that they charge.
Now I know you do it.
Yeah.
I know you do it.
Is that toenail polish? Man, listen, yeah. I get clear on my toenails. I do. I don't care what.
But I have to add,
sure.
I must ask this.
Sure.
Was a part of, and this is not the testimonies
sure.
of others, but was part of your reluctance to even consider it because that did not appear to be a manly thing? Because I remember your
sure.
mother going
yeah.
and saying, well, why don't you go? And I'm like, no.
I don't know. I don't want somebody rubbing on my feet.
Well, it wasn't necessarily the rubbing on my feet, but I surely wasn't going to the gym
sure.
and changing socks and shoes and how the boys look down and say,
yeah. But no,
what's that?
It was a little to deal with, my masculinity. Oh yeah, no man, that's not masculine. That's but it was more so because I wasn't exposed to it and I didn't have all of the information as it pertained to getting your feet done and how beneficial it can be and how good it feels. I equate it to like getting your hair done or getting your hair cut or whatever. I mean, you have to take time to have those self-care moments. Now, even with that, we can take a more recent thing that happened is starting to record and do these podcasts. It was from me posting on Facebook and everybody getting a kick out of the things that I post, and kind of a culmination of people just saying, man, you need to go ahead and do it, try it, it'll be good, man, and all that kind of stuff. And so just to be out of my comfort zone and to do this was one of those things too, man. It was kind of a problem.
Somebody that you saw that did it?
No, it was more so people said that that's what I should do, that it would be good. That I don't know what their background was on podcasts and why they think that my information or my social media platform will be good in spoken word or on a podcast. But it was just something that it just kept reoccurring. Like, you should do it, do a podcast. So I got my little funds together and got some equipment and really went for it.
Well, when you said that, that kind of gives me another way of looking at this passage that I did not think about, because I'm on this track that people have been talking about it in such a way that she had to go. But you present that maybe there were people who were around her because she's in Tyre and she's in the region of Tyre and Sidon, and her daughter is having a demon, and it's not kind of the demons that we tend to think of. It's not the exorcist or poltergeist or stuff like that. I think probably what she was really dealing with was dealing with some real mental health issues that she was just unable to control, and that maybe there were others of whom gassed her up.
Sure.
Say, well, Jesus in town. Why don't you go ask him? You know?
She had no idea.
She had no idea.
And that was her last.
They said, and they kept saying, "Oh, well, yeah. Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that?" So when you were talking about people encouraging you, and I must admit, I am one of those of whom are skeptical, who is skeptical when other people tell me something to try something.
And they haven't tried.
And they haven't tried.
They don't know what it takes. Yeah, man.
They don't know
or they tell you, hey, this is what you should do. This is how you should do it. And they don't know what it takes to do what they say and do. Yeah. I get that a lot.
Yeah.
I get that a lot when you get constructive feedback about your podcast. Like, oh, man, you should do it like this. Man, this. You have never done it. So I appreciate your commentary, but yeah.
But a part of it, and I think this is probably, I don't know all of the people who are talking to you, but also I think sometimes people say that and give us words of encouragement because they want us to be the first one out there, so that they can see how it turns out with you. Then ultimately, then they're able to come and.
I lay the blueprint. You know what I mean? You are the scapegoat, or you are the sacrificial lamb. Yeah.
Well, which kind of brings me to my second question for you, and that is that we have talked about how others have influenced you to try something. Has there been somebody who has come to you? At some point, maybe you didn't have that initial conversation, but they watched you, or they saw you, and they came up to you and at some point and say, because you did this, and because I saw you doing this, it gave me the courage to go and to try it myself.
About 7 or 8 years ago, I was car rental king, during football season. Pops and I, we'd go to the TSU football games, and we was always renting a car because, it's something to drive another car to another state, and you just sitting back relaxing, and you've never been in this type of car. And I mean, each week that we would drive out of Tennessee to go to or Nashville to go to another OVC game, we would rent a little car for the weekend. And
now we went to space.
Well, here's the thing. We're driving to Alabama, Illinois, and so we're taking that time to really to be in conversation with one another, and I can sit in the passenger seat and sip on a little something while Pops is driving a new Ford Fusion or a Ford whatever, a Taurus or whatever the case that they had at the lot. But I'm saying all of that to say that I will never rent from another place besides budget car rental. And during that time, I had a cell phone that I had for work. One time we took the car back. I left the cell phone in the car. And, this is something I'm going to have to come out of pocket and pay for if, I can't get it back from Budget. So I called Budget, gave them my rental number, and they was like, oh, yeah, we got your phone, man. Just come up here and get it. Boom. Maybe the next year or so, I rented a car to go to Atlanta to hang out with one of my frat brothers. Came back home, tired, just dropped the car off, and I left a pair of vintage Jordans in the back of this car, like in on the floorboard. And so I'm getting home and I'm pulling all the stuff out of the car, and I'm, washing clothes and unpacking, and I'm like, dang, man, I left my J's, man. And so I called Budget. I was like, listen, here's my order number. I mean, my rental number, my rental ID. Can you check and see? And so she was like, yeah, I'll call you back if we find it. Man, 20 minutes later, yeah, we got the shoes. Just come on back up here and get them. And so when the Bruz, we had our centennial in Washington, D.C., there was 3 of us that left from Nashville and all rode together. We should have flew in retrospect, but we rode down there together. And when we were planning everything and trying to figure out how we were going to do it, how we were going to get everything together, they was like, oh, we're going to rent a car from Enterprise. Oh, no, we're not. No, we're not. I will never ride in a car, but anywhere from Budget car rental. And to this day, one of my close frat brothers, James Cardwell, and Carlos Williams, to this day, they only rent cars. If they're going to rent cars, it's from Budget car rental because, I told those stories of how they provide exceptional customer service. I don't know the proper protocol for a place like that to, lost and found and all of that. But for a cell phone, that's something that easily you can drop in one of those kiosks and get a couple dollars and some Jordans. Oh, man, you can just put that on the internet and get your money back. But they were able to, provide a sense of, man, anytime I rent with them, they going to take care of me, and Steve. So this had to be 2004. Like I crossed and I pledged the greatest fraternity known to man, Phi Beta Sigma Fraternity Incorporated, in 2003. 2004, my best friend, Steve West, he was, it may have been 2004, 2005, something like that. He was living at the Kappa house because he was planning on being a Kappa, man. And I went over there. I was like, bruh, I don't know what you need to do, but you need to get up out of this house and you need to really just look at yourself and look at what we're doing and come on and join us, man. And after those conversations that we had, Steve really took and ran with it. He became, he became the president of the Nashville alumni chapter. You know what I mean? Those kind of things that I felt like I put that seed in Steve's life for him to then, take it and to be something greater than I was in it. And if it hadn't have been for me, if it hadn't have been some of the things that I did that he saw, that there was no way that he would have been a Sigma.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing those, and I think that there is there's a thread, particularly in the last one that you shared, that I think go back to this story. That when you firmly believe something, then it's hard. To convince people, for someone to convince you that that's not the way for you to be able to go. And I just believe that after all of those skeptics that stood around on that day watched this woman, in particular, watched her after he had insinuated that maybe she was no greater or no better than the little dogs that ran around under the table, but yet because she stood by that Jesus acknowledged her faith. When you have faith in something, it's hard to. It's hard for you to change, and I got a message today from a former member. Well, she's still a member, but she's not attending because she's out of the city. But she says, how do you hold on to faith when it seems like nothing is going right? And I told her to stop and to say, one, that's probably an exaggeration when you say that nothing is going right. And we began to list a lot of things that had become insignificant in the midst of what she's going through. That one thing that she did not want, the one thing that she did want, doesn't seem to be happening, particularly as it relates to trying to find a job with so many people being out and wanting to go back to work, and that's been a real struggle. And it just seems like nothing is going right at this moment. But the mere fact that she's still there, that I imagine that the woman probably still had some challenges when she went back. But one of the challenges that had been lifted from her was the fact that says her daughter was healed. But I believe her daughter was healed because she had the faith to believe that she could stay in there and provide her daughter with the kind of support that is needed. And so I'm just trying to encourage people, and we'll do so on Sunday, and always trying to encourage people to share your stories. You never know how your story will impact some other people, and when they see the strength of your faith, then they are more likely then to also listen to some other things. As I say, I want to thank you for listening in. I enjoyed this conversation with Trey. We're still having services. We're still having some people who are not attending because they are taking care of themselves and practicing distancing. Those who are showing up, we do practice that and try to be cautious of one another. But our doors are open because I recognize that there are sometimes that we have people that just need to be in the midst of community to be able to hear the stories, to be able to share into their own testimony of faith in the midst of this. So if you can, come by and see us. If not, hope you have enjoyed this conversation. I'm always available. Reach out to me. Send me a text message. Send me a message. Send me email, however it is that you are normally contact me. For those of you who may not know how, you can always go to our website, which is Hobson UMC, and send me an email, send me a message through that. Be sure just to take care. I want you to be well. I want you to continue to practice safety. The virus is real. The division that exists within our communities that keep us from being respectful for one another is just as real and is just as dangerous as COVID-19. So these are times that we need to lean on one another, if not in physical proximity, at least through of being able to communicate with one another and trust one another. And I encourage you to be sure to tell your stories because you never know how your story might change the life of somebody else. Take care, be well, and remember to wash your hands. Amen.